Dawson's Rambles.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Ryder here with a Power Rangers theory video based on Dino Fury, and as of this recording, based on the very early information we have from it, from the recent episode descriptions of the first few episodes, and some of the character descriptions. Specifically Sporix, which is a character or thing that is mentioned both in Void Knight's character description and in one of the episode descriptions about something that Void Knight is after. Now when we first got this info, I think I assumed wrongly and kind of foolishly that it was going to be somehow related to the Rangers' powers, mainly because we have kind of a track record of stories where the villains are after the Rangers' powers, especially the last few years. You know, the last 3 series for 6 seasons, you have them after Energems, you have them after the Ninja Steel stuff, you have them after Morphex, so I just assumed they would do that again. But now that I've had time to think about it, I think it's something else, and I think it's going to be our equivalent of Creon, which obviously makes sense since spore, mushroom, spore, that makes a lot of sense. So that kind of begs the question of like, why are they after him, and how is it going to play into the story? And I think there could be some interesting possibilities. As of right now, it really only mentions Void Knight being after him, but I think it's more than possible there could be multiple parties after him. But before we get to that, why exactly would they be after him? So in the Ryusoulger series, Creon is responsible for the creation of like the main monsters of the week. A little bit different than the usual ones for PR, as they're not like creations or generals that are part of an army or prisoners or something. They're kind of created out of humans based on their situation. It's kind of similar in a way to the way Ryder will handle things sometimes, is you'll have a human story sort of tied into it. And I don't know how much we're going to be using of that. We could do away with the human story entirely, but we could keep the fact that Sporix or Creon is in charge of making the monsters, and that could be why Void Knight's after him, because he has this ability to create monsters and maybe will help further his goals, whether it's ruling the earth or whatever he's trying to do. So that makes a lot of sense, and that could set up something kind of interesting. I think that's actually more interesting than the villains being after the Rangers' Ryusouls or the swords or something, and it could create a couple different possibilities. So you have Void Knight with Boom Tower looking for him, and then there is a shot of the Ryusoul suit in the early pictures. I mentioned how it looks like he's kind of hiding or observing just because he's kind of behind a bush, and that's just sheer speculation on my point. Like, you're free to stand next to a bush and not be spying on somebody. So, back again, it's just my speculation. But, if he's kind of a free agent, and we know that Ryusoul and Creon are in a lot of footage together, he could also be after Sporix. Or maybe he's hiding Sporix, or something like that. Or maybe they form an alliance down the line. I think it would be interesting, for at least an initial story arc, to have multiple villains be after Sporix, as like Sporix's powers will be... Sporix is really weird when you keep saying it over and over again. His powers would be the key to sort of ruling or achieving their goals, and maybe they all have different goals. So you could have Void Knight after him, you could have Ryusoul's counterpart after him, you could bring in other villains and have him after him. You could have the Rangers be after him too, because maybe they want to stop more monsters from being created, and I don't know if it would get repetitive or not repetitive if they had it going throughout the whole series, but at least for an initial arc, maybe first half season or first season or something, depending on what they do with it, it would be kind of interesting to have multiple villains and the Rangers after this one key character. Now there's something else interesting that comes into play, as I'm curious if the Sporix powers end up being a key figure in the first few episodes, if that is maybe the reason why all this stuff happened on Earth in the first place. Because as we know, it says that Zato crashed on Earth long ago, he's been in stasis. It says the same thing about Void Knight, so it's very possible that the reason they wound up on Earth was to find Sporix or protect Sporix one way or the other, and maybe it was kind of similar to the Energems in that way. So maybe Zato and Void Knight ended up looking for him, and he's kind of also been in hiding, or maybe in some sort of stasis, sort of similar to how Keeper had the Energems in stasis. You never know. I think that could be interesting as well, as we don't know a whole lot as to why Zato crash landed on Earth. You just know that in the trailer it says he brought the morphing grid to Earth, but it could have nothing to do with the morphing grid. Maybe the villains actually won't be after the morphing grid power. Maybe the morphing grid was just brought to Earth because this Ranger arrived on Earth because of Sporix. Again, this is all sheer speculation. This video could be making a lot out of nothing based on the earlier information. I just thought it was interesting to think about, as I wasn't expecting there to be necessarily such an emphasis on his character, because he just kind of naturally made the monsters for the villains in the series. He's obviously had alliances with certain characters, and there were storylines about that in Ryusoulger, but he wasn't like a sought-after commodity the way they're making this seem. So I think it would be interesting if this character was tied into why the Dino Fury powers made Earth in the first place, and possibly tied to a story of a struggle of power between the villains and the Rangers. But what do you guys think? What do you think the character of Sporix is going to be for the show? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you can notified my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing.